Right, so today we are talking about community ownership in the arts, which is quite a broad title, but I think we've got three very specific and interesting stories to hear about three different organisations and their experience of going into community ownership. So today we have three excellent panelists joining us today, and I'll introduce them quickly and then we'll hear their fascinating stories about their experiences. I should say all these people are interlinked in interesting ways because it's quite a small world, the arts sector, and particularly the community-owned arts sector in the southeast of England. And I should also say, for full disclosure, that I am also on the currently on the management committee for the Ultimate Picture Palace Cinema in Oxford. So I do know Micaela very well and the team down there. Just thought I should make that very clear from the beginning. So let's introduce everybody. So on my screen here, we have Micaela Tuckwell, who is the Executive Director of the Ultimate Picture Palace Cinema in Oxford, which ran a very successful community share offer in 2022, so very recently, just last year. We've also got Richard Daws, who is the co-owner of Komedia Entertainment, which runs two mid-scale comedy and live entertainment venues. One is in Brighton and one is in Bath. And the second of those, the one in Bath, entered community ownership in 2019. So Richard is probably the person who got there first, the organisation that got there first, and everyone learned stuff from him, as we'll hear later. And then finally, Matt Otridge is one of the founders of the Exchange, which is a live music venue in Bristol, which went into community ownership in 2018, around the same time as Komedia. He also works for Music Venues Trust, and he's led on campaigns including our own venues, which recently raised over £2 million, which is incredible, via crowdfunding to safeguard 6 grassroots music venues in the UK. So Matt's work in this area is still very much ongoing and very interesting and important. Okay, so I think just to get us all going, I'm going to ask a few questions to the team to start with to help them explain their stories. And then we really want to have some time for questions at the end. So I'm going to try and give at least 15 minutes for questions at the end. I should keep checking my watch, but that should be fine. So my first question, I guess for people joining the call today, not everyone will know exactly what community ownership means. So I just wanted to know if any of you have a good definition of what community ownership means.
Could I put something out there for that?
Sure, go ahead, Richard.
Yeah, so I mean the definition that is quite easy to understand really is as we've heard quite a lot of privately owned or publicly owned companies are run for the benefit of their shareholders. Cooperatives are run for the benefit of their members. And then you get the community benefit societies, which is a form of cooperative, and that's run solely for the benefit of the community. So if there are any excess profits, they'll be invested back into community projects, not necessarily through that organisation, but for the benefit of the community. Run on very old cooperative rules. I think might be even Rochdale Pioneers rules that's overseen by Co-ops UK.
Thank you, Richard. Either of you the two want to add anything to that very succinct and almost perfect definition, Matt?
Yeah, I think that was pretty much perfect. Just, you know, to flag the democratic angle of it, of where each member, regardless of how much they invest, gets the same amount of say as the other members. So it's one share, one vote. It doesn't matter if you put in £100,000 or if you put in £100, you get the same say in how that society is run.
Yeah, I think that covers it from my angle too.
Brilliant, thank you. Okay, so let's hear how all your organisations got into community ownership. I think we met briefly on Friday and decided that probably Richard should go first, as his story definitely predates in some ways, but also overlaps with the other two stories in interesting ways. So Richard, do you want to explain, firstly, the motivations for your organisation going into community ownership and then sort of how it happened?
Yeah, I mean, the motivation for going into community ownership was that we were operating in Bath in a refurbished cinema. We'd opened a venue in 2008 as a model that ran on the same basis as our Brighton venue. So Komedia was set up in Brighton in 1994 in a very small scale venue. In about 1999, it stepped into a larger scale venue, funnily enough, backed by Daws, who actually sought out Komedia as being one of the businesses that they would like to back. If you don't know Daws, they in fact yesterday won the award for the most sustainable or most ethical bank in the UK for however many years running. And they're from Holland, and they backed Komedia to move into a mid-scale venue. It's a difficult space to operate in sustainably, and not many operators are able to do that. It's a space that historically has been filled by arts centres and council-run operations. So we got the venue that you can see there, which was an empty cinema in Bath. Had the interest of several operators. I think Tesco's wanted to turn it into a in-town shopping centre. It's a grade 2 listed building as well. So I think the council much preferred the idea of having a mid-scale venue that operated across the standard genres, so music and comedy, but also what Komedia did in Brighton, stepping into kids shows, into grassroots music, smaller scale events that never really have any financial grounding, but are good to be doing for the benefit of the community. So we were even back then, a social venture in everything other than our actual setup. We were just run by shareholders who wanted to put arts into the community. So we opened in 2008, and I'm sure everyone on here is old enough to remember that then delivered us perfectly into the storm of the financial crisis. So every metric that we'd set the business up on seemed to disappear, and somehow we managed to survive that and build a model of operation in the venue that was working on many metrics. The one metric it wasn't particularly working on was the financial metric, as in not that we were spiraling out of control, but we just were finding it difficult to run it on a sustainable basis. So we had about 3 or 4 passes at that with different management teams. Eventually, we pulled in a very strong management team and concluded as shareholders that because we were trying to run it remotely from Brighton, our sort of hometown, we realised we'd never really embedded ourselves and engaged in the city as well as we could have done, and we thought, if the city and region wanted the venue, we'd actually cede control and offer our services to run the venue on their behalf if they were willing to back us, to back a community-owned project. And we were convinced to do this actually by a gentleman called Dave Boyle, who's one of the leading experts in community shares. And Crowdfunder, a company that set up in Cornwall, crowdfunder.co.uk, who are the leading platform, and they had various match funds at that point. So we saw this as a route, and then I think you mentioned, James, earlier that I'd done various things. Well, there is no I in team. We had a very sort of a dedicated management team who really committed to the campaign, and we ran a successful campaign in 2017 where we were crowdfunded to the tune of about £379,000. We got over our threshold, our minimum investment that we had on our business plan. We then presented that to the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority, who'd never seen anything like it before, and spent about 18 months then pondering over what we'd done and if it passed all their tests. Eventually, after 18 months, they did convert us. We'd gone about it in a way. I mean, it was new ground. We were breaking new ground, so we went about it in a way that we thought was sensible, but in retrospect, we might have done it in different ways. So those are some of the lessons that were learned by the other operators who are going to talk next. But what we did have in that 1 year trading period is that we had the investors, their money was sat in an escrow account. It wasn't drawn down. We weren't benefiting from it, but we were benefiting from all the other the factors that make community ownership some sort of alchemy that you engage. We engaged 300 and odd members of the community, of the district, of the creative sector, who then suddenly become stakeholders and investors, not just monetarily but emotionally as well into the basis of the venue. So we actually saw in that 1 year, without drawing the funds down, our business have an uptake and reach the level that our business plan had hoped we would get to. So even though it was frustrating not to draw the funds down, we did at least prove the model. Then we had a 1 year period. We converted 26th of March 2019, another 1 year of trading, and then we careered off into COVID, which was something completely different. But anyway, that's how we got there and why we got there, and hopefully by doing that we set the groundwork for other people to follow in our way and learn from our mistakes, because one of the things that we found very quickly is that there's a very small world of cooperatives who are all there to help each other and share knowledge and work to each other's benefit. So we've done that in retrospect as well. We've been offering out our advice to people and hoping others can follow where we set off from.
I mean, thanks, Richard. And I know for a fact that is true, because the former chair of the management committee of the UPP spoke very highly of Richard and being so generous with his time and his expertise. So that's how I found it. Okay, so I think we agreed that Matt was going to talk next about the exchange. Is that right, Matt?
I think so. I think we were going chronological, weren't we?
Yeah. Even though you finished earlier in some way.
Yeah, our stories overlap as well. So actually, interestingly, my journey started around about the same time as Richard's, with my first venue in Bristol, which was called The Croft, and that was 2007. And I do remember that the eye of that financial storm, the credit crunch, wasn't it? That's what it was called, that followed, and having to deal with all that. But set up a music venue in 2007, and we realized after a few years of running it that we could see that there was going to be a bit of an end in sight, really. We were renting the venue, Bristol, the part of Bristol we were in was becoming very, very gentrified, and all of a sudden it was difficult to see that we'd be able to continue to pay inflated rates, or rents even, as the area improved and the landlord was looking to maximize on his investment. So our first way of sort of dealing with the ownership issue was to look elsewhere in Bristol, and we realized that the audience that we were bringing to our venue, who might come and see a band such as Cattle Decapitation on a Wednesday night for £12, probably didn't really care a great deal about going to the trendiest parts of Bristol to see it. So anyway, we set up the exchange in the old market area of Bristol, which now is, 11 years later, is completely unrecognizable due to the amount of gentrification that's happened around it. But this time, at least the building is owned. So I think that was a crucial first part of the ownership. But as time went on, so this time, sorry, I didn't really clarify that, but this time we bought the building as opposed to owning just a lease on it, so we were sort of protected against that issue with the landlord, which is really important. But as time went on, we'd been doing it for over 10 years by this point. We'd invested a lot of our own money in it, and we knew it was never going to make money, but we really passionately cared about what we did, and we wanted it to exist for the culture of Bristol, because we felt like we served a really important demographic, and we felt like we were the only venue around about that size. There's loads of great venues in Bristol, but lots around about 150 capacity and lots around about 400 capacity, and we sort of fit in the middle ground at 250. So it was around about this time we just became first of all, actually, we became a community interest company, because we already realized that actually our intentions were not for profit. and we were doing a lot of different organizing a lot of different events, including gigs that were essentially not with profit in mind, and community focused. So it made sense to kind of go down that road. But a year after doing that, we became aware of what Richard and the crew were doing over at the Komedia in Bath, but also what Le Public Space in Newport had done. So they both ran sort of share offers around the same time. And we actually came down, and I don't think we met Richard, but we met Adrian and his team at Komedia, I think on a couple of times, and had chats with them. We got to know Dave Boyle, who again had worked on Richard's campaign. And crucially, where this is the bit that overlaps, which also may have confused people at the beginning when James said that Komedia started in 2019 and the exchange started in 2018, because we knew all the issues that they'd had with the FCA. We managed to navigate those through Dave's experience and set it up in a different way, which meant we didn't have 18 months worth of conversations. And in fact, I think we actually managed to legally form and start and draw down the money from the share offer probably the best part of a year before you did in the end, didn't you? Despite starting about 6 months or a year after you, which is fairly ludicrous. So we a lot of the reason why we did it was to look at towards the future, because we were all getting a bit older. We kind of were sort of interested in maybe doing other projects, and the idea that the community could come in and first of all raise some money that could make improvements to the venue, which actually made a big difference to the revenue streams, but also would create that sustainability moving forward, so that there would be different people who could run it at the point where we took a step back. And I very strategically used the word exchange founder at the start, because I was the one who founded this, but actually I'm no longer a director. I've taken a step back to work on the Music Venue Trust work, which I'll talk about in a minute. And that was a large part of why we wanted to do it, just to make sure that there would always be people who cared about the organisation as much as we did, who could continue moving it forward in years to come and continue to exist as an important cultural asset in Bristol. So, the nuts and bolts of our share offer was that happened in 2018. We raised £300,000. 100,000 pound of that came through Big Society Capital, which was a match fund. We ended up with just short of 400 members, but we've since gone over 400 because we've kept our share offer open and we still have members who sign up. We've just done a load of great things with that money, really. Like we're now the first grassroots music venue in the whole of the UK to get gold on the Attitude is Everything Charter for Best Practice, which is around about improving access and for all groups. We've improved the PA. We've put in a second performance space. We've got a nice big outdoor awning and seating area, although that corresponded entirely with next door deciding to do a development, which means they've had scaffolding out the front for the last 2.5 years, which hasn't been much very good timing. But it really is kind of chalk and cheese, like how in terms of the venue infrastructure these days, and crucially being a community owned organisation has just meant that we've been a lot more successful in terms of grant funding and what have you, whether that was the cultural the Culture Recovery Fund. We've had some other Arts Council funding through Power to Change and through the local authority. And this actually could be happening at this very moment, installing 25 solar panels on the roof so that we can improve that. And actually, all of these things were budgeted for in our share offer document, but a lot of it has ended up being paid for through grants with a bit of match funding our end. So it's been really successful in that regard, and and the take-ins have sort of improved with that, really. So it feels a lot more sustainable on a financial level as well. So I think that would probably cover it. And then actually, just to end the I'm not going on for too long. Those experiences then took me, both the ownership of the building and the running of a share offer brought me to Music Venue Trust a few years later, where I realized you could apply this principle and purchase multiple venue freeholds to rent them back to the current the current operators, and we're working with the current operators to look at sort of their business models to maybe become more like CIC. Some of them are CBSs already. Just removing the landlord, because the landlord is a real key issue. Even if you have a great community owned organization running the venue, it doesn't mean that that protects you if the landlord suddenly decides they want to develop it, you know, if your lease is running low and what have you. So that's the work I've been doing recently. And yeah, as James said, it raised almost just over 2.3 million, and we're just on the at the starting point now of looking to purchase the venues that we found in for the share offer document.
Fantastic, thank you. Yeah, it's a huge amount of money. So yeah, let's move on to Micaela. I'm sure there's lots of overlaps in what we've already heard, but let's do you tell us the UPP story from your perspective, please?
Yeah, there's loads of overlaps. It's really, really interesting to hear from you both. So I don't know how many people are here from Oxford. So actually, I'm going to give you, I think one of the reasons why a community-owned model was right for our cinema was based or sort of rooted in the history of our cinema. So I'm going to give you a quick potted history of our cinema, and then go on to why we chose to become community-owned. So we were built in 1911, one of the first purpose-built cinemas in the UK. We were nestled in a sort of small residential street just off of Cowley Road. It's a one-screen, no frills. It was originally built for a silent films, just one screen, and it was incredibly popular in the first few years that it existed, but sadly had to close in 1915 when its manager failed to. He applied to get out of conscription, but he was called up in the end, so he had to close the cinema in 1915. And the cinema essentially just lay empty and forgotten about until the 70s, when a group of students clocked it and just decided to try and revive it. And it was called then the Penultimate Picture Palace, which is kind of where we get our name from now. And it was known for sort of wild late night screenings, but it was always sort of flirted with danger in regards sort of the censors and things like this, and actually got into a lot of trouble. And it was a final nail in the coffin when they got into trouble with Stanley Kubrick's lawyers for showing the band Clockwork Orange, and they just couldn't make it work, and the doors finally closed 20 years after they started opening it. Opened it again in 1970s. And in the 90s, the cinema was squatted. It became the Section 6 cinema. It became sort of a cultural and political hub, and they did free screenings, and it was really sort of a lively community space. And they really kept it going until 1997, where a sort of a series of local devoted local owners started to turn the cinema back into a commercial success. And most recently, the most recent of these was a lady called Becky Hall-Smith. And we always focused on sort of interesting programming that would appeal to lots of the area's film fans. So I think it's true to say that the cinema has always been sort of saved by the local community who are devoted to seeing this community venue succeed. And there's even a really great documentary on our website, which is free, called The Ultimate Survivor, which is a sort of documents its history. So I just wanted to give you that little bit of background. So in 2019, Becky Hall-Smith, who owned the cinema, sadly passed away, and it was her wish for friends and families and the lovers of the UPP to look into and explore community ownership, to maintain the cinema's independence. And I guess this is the backdrop of the backdrop here is that a lot of venues, cultural venues, music venues, things like this in Oxford have been going away and been lost in the last 20, 30 years. And so this was a real fear that it would be lost. We lease the building, so we don't own the building. Speaking to what Matt was saying earlier, it's really difficult to make sure that a cinema or a cultural venue stays as it is. When you're up against sort of landlords who might have other plans. So yeah, this group sort of were banded together and tried to explore sort of community ownership. And I don't think they or Becky had any idea the sheer amount of work it would take to get it through to the point of community ownership. And when you throw sort of COVID in the mix as well, it was a long slog. So they started in 2019 exploring this. And I'm just going to share with you some of the steps that they went through in order to get to community ownership. So first of all, they researched different models and landed on what we've talked about, which is a community benefit society. And I think the reason they chose that was not only because, you know, the democratic model means that, and the fact that it's the purpose of the organization is to benefit the community, which felt really right for this type of organization and cinema that it is. But it also seemed to work for businesses like pubs, which, you know, there's lots of community-owned pubs, but not so many community-owned venues. And they saw that, you know, the sales, you know, when you have committed shareholders who want to go and visit their own organization, their own venue, they thought that actually, you know, having a community-owned cinema might be a really good way of making sure that the cinema lasts for the future. So they held a community meeting to gauge whether this would be of interest to our audiences and to the members of our cinema. I remember this, it was in spring 2019, it was standing room only, and so that gave them the real confidence to go ahead with this work. So they formed a community benefit society after that, and they recruited people from the audiences around different skills that they thought they would need. Having spoken to Matt and other professionals and people who'd done community benefit society, they knew that they needed a lot of people with business skills to make a business plan, legal advice. So we've got a lawyer, people who've done share offers before, and as well as that, some marketing and fundraising expertise as well. So they got a group of, I think it was 12 people in the end, to be on that management committee. And they worked together really hard, including myself, to develop what's known as the share offer document, which sort of outlines what your plans are, how much you want to raise. You develop a business plan, so you're getting into the nuts and bolts of what are you going to do, how is the business going to change, and what the model of the business is, and also plan the logistics for the marketing of the campaign. And of course, and this was all ready to go in, I think, March 2020, we were about to launch, and then COVID happened. So we essentially that sort of delayed everything in a big way. The cinema, which I was running at the time, you know, all of you know who run businesses at that time, we didn't know whether we were gonna last, and whether there was going to be a business to sell at the end of it. It was a really tricky time. I mean, I think we kept on doing the business plan again and again. I think we got to version 97, which really made me, it was driving us spare, but we got there in the end. So in April 2021, 2022, we were finally able to launch the share offer. And I'll just give you a little outline as to what our share offer looked like. So our target was £312,000. That was to buy the business off of the old owner, and also to make some small improvements to the access and things like this. And our maximum was £366,000, and that would allow for lots of renovations, because we were in an old building, including sort of re-raking our seats, getting some new seats, things like this. We had 12 weeks to raise all this money, and the price per share was £1, with a minimum investment of £50, and a discounts for locals and under 30s of just £30. We wanted to make this as easy as possible and as accessible as possible for people to buy into their local cinema. We really we this was the point that we tussled over, because we knew that if we made the buy-in low, we would have to get exponentially amount, we have to get thousands of people to buy in. But that was really important for us to allow everyone to buy in if possible. And so in just 8 weeks, when we opened the share launch, after 8 weeks, we managed to reach the maximum with over 1,300 community shareholders, which was fantastic. And so we managed to do that in June last year, and then began the process of actually buying the business from the old owner, which took place in December last year. That took a bit of time, but we're now community owned, and yeah, I'm sure there will be lots of other questions to come. But that's sort of the overview of our share offer.
Sorry, I lost my mute button there for a second. Yeah, so no, thanks, Micaela. That's really interesting. And it's good to hear a bit about the history of the UBP and what makes it particularly suitable, I guess, for this kind of setup, and hopefully we'll secure it moving forward. We've got a very big crowd, actually. Just to let you know, we've got over 40 people in the Zoom, so there's lots of people who've come along today, which is fantastic, including somebody from the Independent Cinema Office, I noticed. So I was just scrolling through the chat quickly. So hello to everyone who's joined. So I'd say if you do have any questions as we go along, please feel free to put them in the chat, but we will also be very happy for you to unmute and introduce yourself and say hello and ask a question in the regular way very soon. So yeah, I suppose I just had one question which I wanted to think about as a group, which is, and again, we've already touched on elements of this, but what do all you feel are the major benefits that you've had from going into community ownership? What have been the real pluses, and what has maybe surprised you the most about what's happened as a result of changing ownership model? That's open to anybody.
I sort of picked up on that when I spoke earlier, but I'd say that probably actually the grant funding has been really important, really. Well, to be honest, without the grant funding, it would have been, I guess we would have been okay over COVID, but because when our share offer took place, and we would have just had to sort of burn the members' money on just surviving. But yeah, I think it's just made it a lot easier. It's essentially a whole new revenue stream that we didn't have before, and and I think that it makes you quite attractive to grant funders because of the fact that you are democratic. You have like a lot of people using, who are members of the venue, etc. And yeah, I would say that's probably the key difference for us.
I think Micaela will be able to say more about this, but I know that the UPP has also done pretty well in terms of grant funding in the last few years. Yeah,
absolutely. I mean, the moving from a privately owned cinema to now a community owned cinema, we were never able to get grants, but we benefited from lots of local grants, but also sort of BFI and things like this. But I would also say, in terms of the major benefits, I'd say from a business point of view, it's made a lot of difference. Made a lot of difference. The cinema sector, even though it's doing well, the films are being made, people are coming back to cinema. A lot of the independent cinemas that I talk to, who are limited companies or not community owned, they're still not back at pre-COVID levels yet, unfortunately, still struggling from the after effects of COVID. And we are really, really unique in the fact that we are now 5% up on our pre-COVID numbers. There's lots of reasons for that, but I think one of the main reasons is that people, our members, and we have 1,300 of them, are wanting to come and support their own cinema. So from a business point of view, it's made a huge difference, I think. And I'm interested to see how long this lasts and whether it lasts. But at the moment, we're in the first year of community ownership, and yeah, it's going really well.
And I'll just pick up on the grant funding side of it as well, because people in Komedia know that I and the other shareholders refer to grant funding as like a crack cocaine habit, that you get hooked on it, and then if you don't get it, you die. And the reason we were sort of mildly sanguine about that is in the mid 2000s, the Brighton venue, without seeking out grant funding, was offered it by the Arts Council, and then a few years later they withdrew it, and it nearly finished us off. So we were sort of decided on the model of not going for handouts and trying to make the venues work self-sustaining, really. But what was most useful about having done our share offer document and deliberated for, it took us about 6 months to write, and we did a share offer document and then had to back it up with a 62-page business plan, which we'd sort of forgotten about until the day before we were about to launch, and someone asked us where the business plan was. So we articulated to the minutiae of what our value was, and why we existed, and what value we added to society. So when the cultural recovery grant forms came forward, we literally just cut and pasted into them, whereas I'm sure lots of other venues were trying to work out, if you've got a spit and sawdust grassroots music venue, how do you suddenly justify the social value of that? We'd already done it, and I think the grant funding for us allows us to do the things that we would never normally do, because they're not commercially viable. I mean, we could run very profitable venues if we opened on Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and we just maximise the bigger events and the club nights. But the question of which there is, I'd argue the merits of all of those, but there are other things that we can do that will never stack up financially. The kids events, the smaller scale theatre, spoken word, just community using the space. We've got a big space, it's not used all the time, and those are the things that sort of it's unlocked, and we're only just starting, really, to get the maximum use out of that building. It's a civic space. Our building, like your building in Oxford, was built in I think it was built in 1908 and then extended in 1921, and it should be a civic space, and it should be used for the next 100 years by the community of that region, and hopefully that's what we've created, that framework, that legacy of how it will do that, beyond our time, but creating that utility within the city centre.
Fantastic, thanks, Richard. We've got a question in from the chat already from Daniela, which actually builds quite nicely on what you're already saying there about audiences. So Daniela asks, could you please tell us a bit about the audience of your venue? So I guess the demographics, the kind of people that do come along, and whether the community dimension is key to their loyalty, which I think we've all agreed it certainly is. But does anyone want to say a bit more about who your audience is and how the community element feeds into that? Maybe Matt first.
Our audience is quite varied. Our general audience, I wouldn't necessarily say is reflected in the people who've invested, but that's quite often the case, because actually, people who've got a bit more disposable money tend to, on average, be a bit older, and lots of them will be altruistic in the idea that they want to sort of preserve this asset for younger generation to use. We do have some younger people, I guess, it's quite difficult at a music venue, because I think that, to use the band who I referenced earlier, who are a real band, Cattle Decapitation, we could have them on a Monday night and they're like death metal from Norway, and then on a Tuesday night we could have like a solo folk artist who's sort of 70 years old, and then on Wednesday night have a house music night or something, so it's so varied, our audience. But in our case, there was a lot of investment from Bristol, and then wider investment. One thing I picked up on was quite a lot of other music venues, so like more solidarity within the community of interest. And I'm quite interested in the idea of local communities, but also community of interest, because that's kind of where the music venue properties kind of thing works, because the idea with that one is that it's music fans from all over the UK who are just basically preserving the network, you know. So it doesn't matter if you're not living in Atherton, you live in Brighton, but you understand how like the ecosystem works and how it's important that all of these venues exist. And you know, so yeah, I guess it was probably mostly Bristol based, you know, mostly fans of music. I mean, like in terms of, you know, demographics and stuff, it's quite varied, I would say. But yeah, I do think there is maybe something also in the fact that the 3 examples today are from cities that are relatively affluent, you know, and there is lots of, I know that Co-ops UK, who I would always kind of signpost as being like, you know, the place where all of this knowledge exists. They do have quite a lot of stats and reports they've done that show where share offers have taken place. Actually, interestingly, by far, I'm doing a community shares practitioner course at the moment, and one of the interesting things that I saw in it was that the Southwest is actually had way more share offers than any other part of the UK, like, you know, double to the next one. So it is quite interesting to see. Actually, Isla's here. She could post the link to that report because it is interesting. Yeah, you know, it's quite interesting to see like, you know, whether it is something that works better in kind of more affluent cities. And I guess Oxford, Bristol, and Bath would all be on the more affluent end. So sorry, I've rambled a little bit towards the end. I'll let somebody else come in there.
I think the original one of the the original question was about audiences and whether it's and demographics. I think before the share offer, and maybe it's a sort of for the COVID as well. Our demographic was largely it was hyper local, so East Oxford, and largely older audiences, which is quite surprising in terms of the fact that the city of Oxford is really quite a young city in terms of the universities, but also lots of families, lots of all ages, but also at the area that we're in also has is very diverse as well, and we were largely not seeing people who are not white coming through our doors. So one of the things that one of the benefits for doing a community share offer was the fact that we had the chance to really think about our audience development and the sort of outreach plans for bringing new audiences to the building. And actually, one of the benefits of having this long period of time during COVID was the fact that we were able to really think through these plans and draw on experiences from other organisations who really know outreach to inform our plans and get and now we're a community-owned business. We are accountable to our community to make good on these plans and have started this work. So we're doing a big audience questionnaire so that we know actually who's coming to our building at the moment, so that we know where the gaps are, but also are going to be appointing outreach officers and things like this to really embed the cinema in the local community. So it's sort of, from a management point of view, is really challenging us to think more broadly about who is coming to the cinema, which it can only be a good thing.
Absolutely. Thanks, Micaela. Sorry, Richard, I was just going to say we've got quite a few questions coming in. I was wondering if you wouldn't mind answering the next question from Duncan Carson. Do you think there's potential to launch a venue with this model, or is it more for the conversion of an established well-loved space? I thought that might suit kind of what happened in your experience best.
I mean, I'd say you need a physical space. You need a town or a city that would support whatever enterprise you're putting forward, be it a cinema, or entertainment venue, or even just mixed use venue. But most importantly, you need about 300 people who are going to put their hands in their pockets and are going to pull together those skills and that wherewithal and that passion to want to make it work. So you need an alchemy of all those three things to make it work. But what I think is quite key is if you look at any town or any city in the country, and you'll see lots of them are disused cinemas, and you'll see the big civic spaces, the high streets evolving. There's going to be more space within it for utility, and retail's on the decline. It just makes sense that the community should reclaim these spaces. And there is no national plan. There is no if you look at the national cultural planning, if you go to the DCMS, they'll tell you in chapter and verse how national sport is organized to grassroots level. There's no plan on the arts, so I'm afraid that's going to be down to us, or you, or any particular town to take up themselves. So I think it's down to pulling together enough people, and also having that realism that you need to build a business, because you got there are two steps really. One, to find the space and raise the capital to get it going, and then the other one, which is by far and away harder, is to keep it going for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years, and not shit cash every year.
Perfectly put. Thanks, Richard. Yeah, so we've got a question from Jacob, who's in the audience. He's got his hand up. Do you want to unmute, Jacob?
Yeah, can do. It was to give you a bit of diversity in the accents as well. So, hi folks, my name's Jacob. I'm from the Save the Belmont Cinema campaign in Aberdeen. I mean, I don't need to explain what's happened with the Centre for the Moving Image up here in Scotland. We lost that back in October last year. And so our cinema, the Film House Cinema in Edinburgh as well, both went down the tubes. And so we've lost quite a bit. So the Belmont campaign popped out of that. So I guess my question to you guys was, has community ownership for you guys led to like an uptick in ticket sales and engagement in your venues? And also, what would be the main lesson that you've taken from having shareholders? Is it kind of high maintenance reporting back to them, or is it quite easy to do?
Thanks, Jacob, and thanks for coming along. Anyone want to speak to that?
So the stakeholder management, I think, like with the exchange, there's been times where it's been good, and then there's times, generally what happens, I suppose, is that like when there's crises, of which is crisis a word, but like when there's a crisis to deal with, it's the first thing that sort of goes by the wayside, and I think that's always a bit of a bad idea, but it's just one of those things. I've recently agreed to sort of just help them come back in to help sort of manage a bit of it, because I felt like it was important. I was hearing that from other members who will always associate me with the venue. So, so I think I think the best thing to do is the answer on a technical level is actually there isn't that much stakeholder management that you have to do by like from the kind of rules of your society. It's generally having the very simplified version, an AGM once a year, and that the investors can come along to, but you will get more out of it, which is the answer to the first question. The more engaged and the members are and feel a part of the venue, they want to sort of come down more often. They want to sort of turn up and say, do you know I'm one of the owners here, and let them do that, because if by the time they're doing that, they're at the bar with 3 of their friends or having a drink, so I think that it is definitely worth, if you are setting up a new society, to really put it at the heart of what you are doing and try not let it to go by the wayside when you're dealing with the next issue that you're having to go through. And there's always going to be issues. I mean, in terms of our experience, it is quite hard to say, because the community actually took over at the start of 2019, so we got a year, and that went reasonably well. It was up on the other, and then of course COVID happened, and for most music venues, after they came back from COVID, takens were through the roof, and it's kind of continued to be successful, but I can't really tell you if it's any more successful than other venues in Bristol are. I don't know if everybody's had the same banks. It started kind of going down again a little bit, after a year after COVID. But obviously as well, there's just so many external factors at the moment, like with all of these different national crises, like with the energy prices and the cost of living and everything like that. It's quite, the data analysis is quite difficult at the moment because it's not a very sort of a very straightforward picture.
Can I build on that, Matt? I think I want to I want to echo that. However much you put in, I think you'll get more out. Basically, we've definitely had a better bounce back in terms of ticket sales and admissions compared to other independent cinemas. So in that sense, it's been really good. But also, we've used our membership for things like professional advice. So we've put out call outs for, if someone has, we've asked if people have a market research experience or sustainability experience. And we've got free pro bono consultations and help in ways that we could have never imagined before. I think that's the real magic of community ownership. Also, I just want to say I'm really, really sorry about. We were all really sorry to hear about Edinburgh and Moving Image Centre. It's been shocking to watch.
You want to come back on that, Jacob? Are those good answers?
Those are good answers, and thank you for your solidarity with Aberdeen and Edinburgh. I know that I don't think I'm quite right in saying this, but I think it's the first time in a very, very long time that Aberdeen has not had an independent cinema. And I know that we're all feeling it quite a bit up here at the minute. I don't know the number of times I've had to not go and see a Marvel film at the local cinema or something. But yeah.
Great, thanks, Jacob. Actually, there's another point in the chat from Gwen, who's also from Save the Belmont Cinema, about volunteers.
My question was actually about, and it links to one further back in the chat about is just as easy or just as feasible for a launch of a venue, which ours would be, because the Belmont Cinema is now closed, as it is for one that's up and running to convert to this model. And my question relates to when, ideally, because I think we're there right now, you would have employees, because we are all enthusiastic volunteers, and we've got some great skills and networkers and networks through the people who are our volunteers, but it's nobody's day job. So is there a point at which, and it may be the point at which you register or you decide what your timeline is going to be for your shareholder, is there a point, and any ideas as far how we might pay those people, types of grants or other things, or relying on donors? So that's my question.
Do you want to talk about volunteers and donors?
I guess from a technical point of view, actually setting it up from scratch is probably going to be easier than converting, for the reason that some of the reasons that Richard mentioned earlier. Setting something up from scratch is always, the FCA won't need to monitor it in quite such rigorous way. It's a bit of an open-ended question, really, the one about volunteers, because I know the Cube Cinema in Bristol runs entirely on volunteers and has done the whole time. And if you speak to the people who run it, there's clearly pros and cons down there. I don't feel like for the Exchange we would ever have been able to rely solely on volunteers. I just think that we needed to have, what we wanted to do was actually remove the volunteerism, is that a word, from it, because we felt like that it would be more sustainable in the long term. I think we would recognize that actually there were too many people getting underpaid or like giving up a certain amount of hours for free to make it happen because they love the place. And I think that's great. But we also wanted to feel like as it moved into the future, there would always be like paid roles at the recommended rate of pay, because we felt like that would be more sustainable. But if you're starting from a place of this is always going to be volunteer led, what's the interest in that? Then it is possible to do it. It's just that I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to that. Is my gut feeling.
Can I add to that? Because I think that was a good answer. We obviously were an established business with our business runs with a small paid team, but also 40 volunteers a week. 40 volunteers as in our volunteering program who do bar and stewarding. But in terms of setting up the share offer and raising the capital for your share offer, what the management committee of the Community Benefit Society did was apply for grants. So we got a grant from Power to Change, which I think Matt, you mentioned as well, to hire some professionals who could help us with the share to develop the share offer. And at the point of and it was only then at the point of having raised the money and buying the business that the Community Benefit Society buying the business sort of 2P'd the current staff over. So I mean my point, my sort of advice would be to make as much of the grants that are available for this kind of development work, and hiring professionals, and then use the expertise and the enthusiasm of all your volunteers to get to the point of raising the money, because that's the important part. But yeah, I'm very happy to have a conversation with any cinemas who are wanting to explore this. By the way, I'll drop my email in the chat.
Thanks, Micaela. Richard, you got anything to say about staffing and volunteers? I think then after that we've probably got time for one final question. There's one from Andy in the chat, but
yeah, sure. I mean, we don't use volunteers at Komedia, and yeah, we have staff who are largely young and trying to earn their living and pay their mortgages. However, I am looking at other models. Principally, there's an old cinema in Newton Abbot that I'm trying to build a plan around. And there are only two real major costs beyond, if you imagine you can get an event to work and it stacks up financially. The only two other overheads that you've got that are of any meaning are the building costs and the utilities associated to that, and the staffing costs of running the business. And if you've got a local authority that happens to own a building that might want to give it to you, and a lot of volunteers, then you might be able to bring it down to, can I run events that get an audience that run, on a financially viable basis? But within all of that, whether they're volunteering or not, you will need people with the wherewithal, with the skills and the ability to deliver events that are on par with those run in all the commercial venues. So volunteering or not, you need a real core of expertise of delivering, be it cinema or live entertainment.
Great, thanks for all those answers. That was really helpful.
Thank you. And I hope this has been useful for yourself and any other organisations who are here who want to learn from this. Yeah, there's one final question which might work actually quite well as a final question, because it's quite a reflective kind of one to go with. So Andy Edwards says, I'm interested if you had to start over tomorrow with everything you've learned, would you do this? Would you do it the same way? Would you choose the same model, or would you take a different route?
I would change little things about how we did the share offer campaign, and maybe, probably like a potential rule change or two within the constitution. But I think overall the models worked for us, and I'm very happy with it, I think.
I would thanks, Andy, for your question. I think the biggest issue that we had was that we underestimated the maximum investment that we were looking for. So for the target investment, we were just buying the business, and then when we were seeking, if we went past that, we were looking to do some extra renovations and building costs for the cinema, and building costs have gone through the roof, and now we're in the position of having to go out to raise more money in order to meet the commitments that we had made in the share offer for for building an accessible loo and rake seats and all these things. So I would put more time and energy into giving ourselves a little bit of a buffer for those kind of eventualities. But other than that, I'm 100% certain that at this point in time, community benefit society route was the best route for the cinema. For our business.
And I mean, yeah, the question is, would I do the same again? Well, I'm actively trying to do the same again. There's so many merits to the community benefit society model, and underpinning that is the cooperative model. So the John Lewis approach. So I'd say if you want to engage and bring in a huge audience, then the CBS model works perfectly. If you had a business that's doing okay and that doesn't need to increase its audience, then the cooperative model of employee ownership also has lots of the same merits. So I'm a huge advocate. I didn't know this space particularly well before 2017, and now I'm going to spend the rest of my career trying to help other people down this path.
Thank you. It's a very nice, positive point to end on. Thank you. I think we've answered all the questions from the chat, which is really good. I just wanted to wind up. There's been a very lively conversation going as well, so we'll try and save the chat and make sure it's available in some form, maybe on the recording when we release that on our YouTube. I just wanted to say thanks very much to our panelists today. So Richard Daws from Komedia, Micaela Tuckwell from the Ultimate Picture Palace, and Matt from lots of different places, but Save Our Venues and Music Venue Trust. I think it's been really fascinating, and I hope you've all enjoyed it as much as I have. So thanks very much for coming. Thank you.